In this video, we are going to be looking at solving equations. We'll start with your pre-lecture notes. In your pre-lecture notes, you read about the steps to solving equations. The first step is to simplify any parentheses using the distributive property. Also, you want to combine like terms. Second step is to collect all the variable terms to one side. You want to use addition or subtraction to accomplish this. Third, you want to collect all the constant terms on the other side. Again, you want to use addition or subtraction to accomplish this. Finally, you want to make the coefficient of the variable term equal to 1. This will be accomplished using either multiplication or division. And then the fifth step is to check your solution. One note is that in your MyLab assignment, some of the questions will ask you, are there any excluded values? That is not a topic that we're dealing with in this course as we review some basic solving strategies. So the answer to that question is always there are no excluded values. So we are not talking through the excluded values, and you will not encounter any problems with excluded values. We're going to refresh equation solving by doing examples, and I'm hopeful that as you go through a few, you remember the details, and then as you practice, they come back to you. So we'll start with something that's pretty basic, and yet when I taught high school, we started more basic than this. So starting with the idea that you have done this before. When I look at this problem, I am trying to solve for x, which means that I need to move everything away from the x. Based on the notes that we took, we have to collect the constant terms separate from the variable terms. So in this problem, I am noticing that there is a -2 and that should be moved by addition or subtraction over to with the 12, which is the other constant term. So the opposite of -2 is +2. And in algebra, whatever you do to one side of the equals, you have to do to the other side of the equals. So since I'm adding 2 on the left-hand side of the equals, I need to add 2 on the right-hand side of the equals as well. -2 plus 2 cancels and gives me a 0, so that is removed from the equation, and I have a -7x remaining on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, 12 plus 2 is 14. Now, I need to get the coefficient, the number in front of this variable, to be 1. So currently the x is multiplied by a -7. I want to do the opposite of multiply, which is to divide by -7. And since I'm doing that on the left, I also have to do that on the right-hand side of my equation. So -7 over -7 is indeed 1. We typically do not write the 1 in algebra, and so we just write the x. And then we'll do 14 divided by -7, which is -2. If you want to check, you would take the -2 and substitute it back into the original problem. So in the original problem, we would have -2 minus 7 times a -2. Math-wise, that would give us -2 plus 14, which is indeed 12, and so it does check. I do not require that you check your work. In MyLab, you will type your answer in and it will tell you if it is right or wrong. And then on an assessment, you may check your work just so that you have confidence if you have time. But if you're running short on time, give me the answer and move on to the next problem. So let's try a second example. So in this example, again, I have no parentheses or like terms to worry about, so I'm right away moving into solving. And I want to get my constant terms together. So I'm noticing that on the side with the x, there is a subtract 1, and I want to move that over to be with the 3. So the opposite of subtract 1 is to add 1. And since I'm doing that on the right, I want to do that on the left as well. These guys cancel. So 3 plus 1 is 4. And on the right-hand side, I have x over 5 remaining. Now I want to get the coefficient for the x to be 1, so I want to get it by itself. Right now it is divided by 5. I need to do the opposite. So the opposite of divide by 5 is to multiply by 5. If I do that on the right, I also have to do that on the left. So multiplying and dividing by 5 will cancel the 5's. And so I just have x. And my x is equal to 5 times 4, which is 20. And since my pen was wonky there, I'll rewrite that. So x is 20. Again, you could check. So plugging that in, 20 divided by 5 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3, which does indeed check. Our next example is just a tick harder because it does have parentheses, and so we need to review the distributive property. For the distributive property, I'll take the 2 and multiply it by the x, and I'll also take the 2 and multiply it by the 5. So this gives 2x plus 10 is equal to negative 24. Now, I'll want to get the 10 over with the negative 24 so that I'm working to get the x all by itself. First, I will subtract the 10 because plus 10 and minus 10 do cancel out. On the left-hand side, I have 2x. On the right-hand side, both of these are negative. Use your calculator if you're not comfortable doing the mental math. We should get negative 34. So our final step is to get the 2 by itself, to get rid of the 2. So the x is by itself. So I'll divide by 2 on both sides, and I'll get x is equal to negative 17. Let's try one more example in this video. So when I look at this one, I put this one in the video on purpose because some of us will struggle with this negative in front of the parentheses. This negative does need to be distributed to both of the items that are in the parentheses. And distributing is the first step. Some of us prefer to add a 1 here because this does represent a negative 1, and that makes it easier for us to see that we have something to distribute. So completing the distributive property, I get 2 minus f minus 8 is equal to 2f plus 12. Back in my pre-lecture notes, I recommended that in step 1 you also combine like terms. When you're doing that, the term includes the sign in front of it. So here I have a positive 2 and a negative 8 that are both on the left-hand side of my equation. And so I'm not going to do the opposite, but rather just do the math itself. So 2 minus 8 is negative 6 minus f is equal to 2f plus 12. This step of combining like terms is not essential, but it does make the problem a little bit more cleaned up and easier to work with. The next step from our pre-lecture is to get the variable terms together. So I'm going to add f to both sides of my equation, lining it up where my other f term is. I now have negative 6 is equal to 3f plus 12. Moving through the steps in my pre-lecture, I now want to get my constant terms together. So I want to move the 12 to the opposite side. I do that by doing the opposite, which is to subtract 12, and I do that on both sides, the left and the right of my equals. So negative 6 minus 12 is negative 18, and that is equal to 3f. I am now able to finish my equation, and to finish it I need a coefficient of 1, and I get that by either multiplying or dividing. Since it is 3 times f, I want to divide by 3 as the inverse, do that on both sides, and that gives me negative 6 is equal to f, which is my answer. We're going to stop here in this video, and then the next video we'll have some additional examples, bring in some of the other little nuanced things that we have to remember as we refresh algebra.